so then, now that you have an audience, how do you turn that into revenue streams? And so we're very lucky to have a very new and very interesting nonprofit here in Portland called Journalism Accelerator, and Lisa Skube is one of their select staff, and she's going to tell us a little bit about what she is seeing going on around the country. Journalism Accelerator is like a forum and a think tank for ideas about online publishing and journalism.
Hi, glad to be here today. We're really pretty much drinking from the fire hose, and I'm the founder of the project. It launched officially mid-June last year, and the premise behind this is that well, journalism is critical, and it's a good business model. But publishers across the country are having a hell of a time monetizing content. So as the Journalism Accelerator has come forward, it really is an opportunity for publishers to come together to together source what are the kinds of questions that they have, and what are the ways that they're solving for those kinds of problems, what are the challenges that they're facing, what are the opportunities that they see, what kind of success are they creating, you know, at the end of the day, doing more of what works and doing less of what doesn't. But the problem is, if everybody can't collectively and composite see what's working and what's not, everybody's flying blind. And there's so much chaos out there, it's very hard to be able to identify what's working and what's not and why. So this project has come up around, like what Amy was saying, we're not the experts, but all of the different publishers are in different areas based on their experience, based on how they're solving problems for their communities, and based on what they know in their knowledge base, based on their own expertise about what they're publishing about and knowing their communities. So at its simplest, the Journalism Accelerator, it's an information exchange. It's an online project where we are really looking across news networks. It goes back to looking at information communities, and it's not just legacy, it's not just the new media publisher, it's radio, it's broadcast, it's all of the different components within that ecosystem, which is in its own right beyond the usual suspects, because typically broadcast hangs out with broadcast, radio hangs out with radio, legacy hangs out with legacy, and new media is hanging out with new media. And much of the new media publishing segment is a lot of folks that are coming out of a non-journalism background, often a technology background, or there's a hole in their community where they're seeing an opportunity that they're jumping in to seize. So beyond that as well, we are looking at, like Amy was talking about, as we create these forums based around questions that are commonly held by publishers, we also are going out to experts in search engine optimization, or we're looking at people that are very knowledgeable about legal or nonprofit business models. The different areas that are very, very helpful and informative to publishers. You can't be expert at everything, and now it's events and, you know, all the swag and all these other things that people are looking at in terms of trying to create revenue to sustain their business. We are locally grown in that we are based here in Portland. We've got 5 of us working, and we organize these forums in a real traditional grassroots outreach type of a methodology. So we're very, you hear about CRM, the idea of customer relationship management. We're very, very community-based, and we're very much about going out and literally working with the community to source the questions, to identify which questions might be most constructive to ask, and then as well how to get those questions in that actual forum really engaged by going out and literally bringing people into that conversation who may be knowledgeable about that conversation. So we're going to go ahead and move along here. I just want you to understand the context of the project, because really our objective is to get oxygen to publishers first so that they can in turn help their communities thrive. So we are set up around a forum, and if Cornelius clicks into the question link, what you'll see is what we call a participant grid, but really the dynamic nature of these questions is really served by the amazing communities that come together to really answer and to be involved in these forums that we hold. And out of these questions, go ahead and click onto the resources, we're surfacing resources. So essentially we're crowdsourcing the kinds of resources that other publishers are using, and we vet those resources to an extent, not heavily. We don't go out and try every technology application, but we do ensure that that application is actually being used by publishers, that it's not just more technology for technology's sake, but that there are actual solutions that these publishers are using that are helping them at the end of the day create business or create a sustainable model for their own businesses. And then on the blog, what we're doing is we're distilling these very dynamic conversations down into, in this case, an index. And Diane Lund participated in that one, as did Cornelius. The conversations provide so much information. And so really what we're bringing back then to the community is a way to be able to actually click through these different types of conversations based on the types of resources that emerge from them. So as we've been doing this, if you want to go, I'm going to move kind of quickly because we actually have some data and some stats to look at. Because one of the things that Cornelius had asked is, what does it look like across the country? Because we are locally based, it doesn't mean that we're not just looking at the local scene, which we're definitely very much concerned and invested in, but we're also looking at how does that measure up, or how does that relate as you look at different types of experiments that are happening around the country. So in order to do that, there's a lot of different types of business models out there. But some of what we have the opportunity to, as we talk about drinking from the fire hose, if we go ahead and continue clicking through, is we get the opportunity to see a lot of data, research, and analysis that's going on in the field. And these next sets of slides are giving you a sense of how a couple hundred publishers across community publishers and investigative news publishers are seeing their landscape and how they're working. And it's interesting right now because with the onslaught of hyperlocal publishing, which started to emerge mid-2000s-ish for really the first wave of hyperlocal publishers, those guys, and Tracy Record, who was here last time, they're now kind of the old guard. And a lot of those hyperlocal publishers who have come into their communities back in 2005, 2006, and 2007 are now no longer the it kid or the new sexy community publisher, but they're looking for a way to continue to sustain their business.
And what you mean by hyperlocal is these, I mentioned it before, these very small, like North Portland coverage areas. Exactly. on the web.
Yeah, usually neighborhood by neighborhood, sometimes a larger area, but yeah, it's a very specific community and it's geographically based. And then there's also niche publishers like Diane, who's covering health, or the Bug Chicks, who are covering bugs. Lots of different business, technology. So there's a lot of different types of publishing that's beginning to emerge in the field.
And just so that people understand, these are interchangeable. These are all just niches. So whether you're a hyperlocal publication that's covering a geographic niche, or you're covering food, it's the same thing from a publishing point of view. There's an audience that's interested in A. And in hyperlocal, they're just interested in this geographic area, my neighborhood, what happens around me. And so the innovation with hyperlocal was that people were interested in just their area, just around them, and that became a new niche. So again, just so you know that it's all the same thing in publishing parlance. And so that we are talking to things that are relevant.
And there are many who really do not much care for the term hyperlocal. They're local community publishers, and there are different ways of referring to the contribution that these different publishers make. But the important thing is that they are serving a need in their community, and many of them are really struggling to find that business model, and many of them are very relieved to know that they're not going it alone, which is part of the reason that I'm sharing these slides with you, and go ahead and keep moving through them. As we've gone through and we've talked to a lot of the different publishers coming into this year of 2012, we went out to talk to a pretty broad sample of different folks, investigative, executive editors, in community publishers, et cetera, to really try to get a sense of what did they see as the most critical bite of the apple, that if that one thing didn't happen, then the rest of it really, wasn't terribly relevant. And of course, everybody comes back around revenue. That everybody is struggling with trying to figure out how are they going to create sustainability around their publishing model to be able to be of service to their communities or to the niche or to the target audiences that they've identified. And you see a mix of either the nonprofit, 501c3s, for-profit, LLCs, S corporations. There's a lot of different things that are being experimented with, and there's different pros and cons to each of those models, and a lot of that has to do with your content. we can go ahead and keep clicking along.
And that's kind of a brand extension in a lot of ways.
Yeah.
Your business model is a brand extension. So the nonprofit, you're still bringing in money, you still have to make money, but there's an added value, social value that comes with the nonprofit status, and the halo, what they call in marketing, the halo effect that comes around that, that originates with the brand. In many cases.
And there is, it's exactly spot on. There's as we get a little further in, there's a slide where literally a very, very smart gal in Birmingham, Alabama looks at it from what's the problem you're trying to solve? And then really looking at your business model that comes up underneath that. So we can continue just moving along here. Again, this is just contextual to give you a sense of how broadly across the country, again, different publishers are seeing their primary funding sources. And moving to the next slide, looking at earned revenue from advertising and the ways that different publishers are seeing that in aggregate. And a great majority of the publishers are looking at trying to pursue the local advertising nut. And then others that are looking at national advertising, which is a little bit of a surprise because often you see local publishers aren't really all that interested in the national advertiser. And then the next slide is we look at the publishers that are looking for underwriting, syndication, and that as well many are looking for the sponsorships as a revenue.
How do they define sponsorship?
Sponsorships is underwriting. It's more of having, like say for the Bug Chicks, they might have a funder come up underneath, say some training modules that they're able to give to schools for free. So you get...
so is that custom content?
It can be. It can be, but then again, a lot of it is how you negotiate with whoever that sponsor may be. Is it exclusivity that only they are going to be able to have their, their extended brand on it, depending on what that is. It also depends on if you're a nonprofit, if you're a for-profit. There's going to be different requirements related to that as well. But the sponsorship models, and it also can vary state to state depending on where you are and what the requirements are based on that. So it can be very complicated.
Right.
And then this continues to go into some of the questions that Cornelius is asking, syndication, looking at wire models, or looking at story-by-story syndication. And then as we get into, this is the the payload is like, what are the methods? And Diane had participated in one of our forums at the end of February, which was all about sustainability. And this was one of our favorite quotes out of the entire forum. Just really looking at that, helping readers understand that news isn't free, content isn't free. And then also going back to the point that Cornelius was pointing to, Emily Lowery speaking to, looking for how you're going to be solving problems in your community is a really good way to start thinking very strategically about how are you going to create a business model that's going to help you sustain in the long term.
And we're undergoing a strategic business plan right now. Fortunately, we got some help, financial help to do that. So.
Which is huge. It's so helpful. And so many of the skills that journalists have go part and parcel with actually figuring out your business model, which is asking questions, doing interviews, thinking critically, and really looking at where your content is of greatest value. And quite often, those that are going to fund your content aren't the primary beneficiaries. And you can create different ways of compartmentalizing your content so the food doesn't necessarily have to touch per se, but that you still have a content model that is being sustained in a way that you're going to be able to do it over the long term.
And we have the funding to hire a professional consultant to do that.
Which is hugely helpful because publishers already have enough on their plate, much less than becoming business experts.
You really can't do it yourself.
Right.
Someone from the outside looking in.
Well, and as well, that whatever that business strategy is, it has to make sense to you so that you're going to be able to do that day in and day out.
With the consultant, we've had many disagreements and agreements, et cetera, et cetera. But still,
so as we move to the next slide, I'm pulling up some examples of different ways that folks are looking at different types of revenue streams. And it's interesting, I think about the circular, the legacy circular. Well, there's a lot of electronic circular styles that are starting to come out in the form of shopping guides. And if we can click through some of these links, you can see some of the examples that we're sourcing from the sales model. This is, again, Emily Lowery, who's in Birmingham, Alabama. And we've got a few links here as we look at sales. If you click back to the deck and you hit the shopping guide, Emily also has a shopping guide that will help. This is part of her content model within her actual site that goes more into actual content. going a little deeper into some of the different folks that are going to then have the ability to talk about what their businesses are doing with a lot more information and context, which is, again, what reporting can do and do very well.
Is this sponsored content? Is this?
Yes.
Is it advertorial?
Yes.
Okay.
And then if
So sponsored content where the advertiser pays for the story or for, you know, a text, not an ad, display is something that's become common practice.
But important to let people know that that is the case.
Right.
So it's just a matter of disclosure. If people understand, then they're not going to be surprised by that. If we click onto the deals link, these folks, DNAinfo.com, are based in Manhattan. They are funded quite nicely by Ameritrade, one of the Ameritrade founders. Oops.
No.
That's actually, this is the Birmingham, this is Emily Lowry's third asset, and this is literally a shopping site. So this is another component of her business model that then allows her to sustain the publishing that she does for her community across those other assets that you were looking at, but literally has created a pretty nice, slick way of going out to the different communities there in Birmingham. And nobody else is doing this in her community, so she's been able to also have that first to market advantage of being out in front of others and also modeling this in a way that's
why would
pretty
people shop
effective.
on her site and not on eBay or something else? What's she bringing to the marketplace that other people don't have?
She's got local relationships with these businesses, and these businesses
So
might
these are
not be
local.
out. Yeah, again, this
Right.
is all local, and as you see Patch and some of these other enterprise models that are trying to get into communities,
Right.
they don't have relationships with the communities. The local publishers do.
Now these stores have on e-commerce sites already?
No.
Okay, so there's a
So-
market opportunity there, and people who identify, the businesses that identify with your brand or your message, and who are not as technically savvy or as sophisticated or can't make an e-commerce site pay off.
Or just haven't gotten there yet, and Ken's
Yeah,
going to speak to
haven't
this
gotten-
as
yeah.
well, and he's got some really great examples from some of the things that they're doing as well. But it's the opportunity that you have through the relationships and just feet on the street to really be able to go out and talk to the community that wouldn't be online and that wouldn't have the ability to bring some of their wares to a community in this way that Emily's been able to do. So again, just examples of some of the things that other publishers are doing where she's finding some really great success around this. The sweepstakes, I believe, is actually the DNAinfo.com example. Sorry, I got ahead of myself on that. So this is, again, DNAinfo.com. You can see they've got the neighborhood tab, they've got topics, sweepstakes, wellness. They've got a kid component where they literally, as you look across the colored tabs at the top, they have topical issues where they're supporting the communities across Manhattan. They'll pick a particular subject, and for them, looking at kids, Beats and Eats is kind of a food guide. But this has been extremely successful for them. Of course, entertainment is a big deal in Manhattan, but it's a very sophisticated way for them to be able to sustain their business in a lot of different ways that they're doing it all in the same site. And if you do click into the neighborhood component, they've got wonderful content. They do a great job, and they keep expanding out across all these different communities where they really have ongoing community content, but then they have all these other elements that are actually helping them support their content model. And they're pretty sophisticated and they're pretty well funded. So, you know, just putting that out there. Memberships and donations is the last one, and there's a lot
Events?
Oh, yes, absolutely. Let's go to events. Sheepshead Bites, they are based in Brooklyn, and they have started to do events, as many publishers are, as another revenue track. And many publishers are seeing a great deal of success around that. And part of it is that you get to bring your community together around pizza or a particular community issue. Diane had a
I think
comment.
you forgot one source of funding as a nonprofit, which we are, foundation grants.
Yeah. And we're going to,
It'd be a good source to just, you know, starting out, for example, if you've got the right business plan.
and typically too, one has to be a 501c3 before they do that, which is another decision point for, you know, a publisher to make.
The events is interesting because, you know, this is a model that comes up a lot about monetizing your audience. So once you have an audience that cares about a certain thing, they may be interested in a certain area of expertise. And then rather than trying to sell an ad on top of that, saying, you know, you're a business, you want to attract these folks, why don't you buy an ad? There were other ways, which, so we recently, I was at an event where they talked about a website that basically sold their audience as a focus group to people who wanted to do product testing or wanted to just do market testing. And so what they would do is the publication would put the word out to their audience, hey, you know, this is a free site, so we need volunteers who know about this area, and what we want to do is have you as a focus group, and we're going to ask you these questions. And that works for them. Another one was the Texas Tribune famously has events where there's one-on-one or panel discussions with different political figures in the state of Texas. They just cover, the Texas Tribune just covers state politics, and so they charge people to have to come in and have these, you know, one-on-one, on-the-record conversations with the different leaders in their, you know, in the political realm there, and it's been a good revenue source. And again, that's about knowing who your audience is really.
And letting them know what you're up to before you do it. So long as everybody's very transparent about what they're doing. If it's an advertorial, just be super transparent about what your sourcing is. And often that doesn't mean that they get a whole editorial sway, but you know where the money is coming from.
And transparency is the key, because a lot of this stuff, you know, is just unconventional and can sound like hoodwinking, and and you know, again, transparency is always the key.
I think one thing we're going to do, looking into, will be webinars, where instead of having an event at a particular place, people could join a discussion, they would pay a certain fee. And
absolutely,
there's some technology costs to get into that, but that's something that we intend to look into.
It would be a really good one for you guys.
I just wanted to jump in. The scanner where I work, every Martin Luther King Day, we have a breakfast where 1,000 people come. And before you jump into the events thing, it's taken 25 years for that event to build to this level, and it's a nightmare, okay? It's so much work, it takes months, and before you come up with an event, don't just say to yourself, oh, I'm gonna have an event to make money. No, you have to invest more into that. You need to figure out a way to feed many birds with one hand, or you're blowing that opportunity. So be clear about what it's for. Think about other things you can be doing there. We give away scholarships and all these things. So it's a branding event. It's about making some money, but also it's a kind of a prestige building thing. And if you think about your short and long-term goals with it. Don't just jump in and think, because you may throw a pizza party and not make any money and go, well, I'm never doing that again. Give it some thought and try to put a lot of woof into that effort. I just can't stress that enough. And Cornelius was there this year. Didn't it freak you out when you saw how big it was?
Oh, I had no idea. Nothing could have prepared me for how large that event was. It was
and
massive.
A lot of people have never heard of it, and there's 1,000 people there.
It's because it's 25 years.
I think that's part of it.
Well, and you know, it's absolutely correct. I think so much it's the really outlining what are the expectations, what are you hoping to accomplish from this, who are the other natural partners, are there volunteers, is there somebody to actually help coordinate those activities. I mean, the points that you raised just couldn't be more important about, you know, it's robbing Paul to pay Peter, like making sure that as you're balancing out what you're doing in a given day, what makes sense for you and who are the other people who might step forward to help you with those types of activities.
A question?
My question was about that Alabama paper that had the advertorial content. I didn't see any way that they denoted that was advertorial. I'm curious, like how they did, or if it's positioned on the page, or how that was made clear.
That would be a good Emily Lowry question to ask those specific details.
Okay. Because it just looked like a typical post to me. It didn't say anything in the headline. I was just curious how they distinguished that.
Let me get back to you on that question.
Okay.
And I'll even like post it out for Cornelius so he can post that back out to the group. So I'll source that question for you.
Here's an underwritten, this is not sponsored content, but this is underwriting that the partner Portland Afoot does. And so you have at the top of the post, blog coverage sponsored by Drive Less Connect with a link. ODOT's, and they get the brand message here. Sweet new carpool matching site. Now maybe that sounds like Michael to me, so maybe he may put that in there. But and then you know from that point on that this is made possible. This coverage, this post. But that's more underwriting than sponsored content. But a lot of times you'll just see, you know, it'll be mentioned at the top.
So we've got another set of revenue streams on the next slide.
Training.
And it goes back to some of what Diane was talking about, the idea of training and consulting. Oakland Local in California has 7 additional revenue streams, and the training and consulting one has come to be a really, really significant one for them, because so many, and Ken can speak to this, so many of the businesses that aren't online have no idea how to represent themselves online. And so publishers become a bit of an interpreter or a translator about how they can do that, how they can do that effectively, how their particular audience is going to be really good for their business in terms of both trusting the publisher directly, as well as being able to understand better about what that business is doing. So the idea of training and consulting, it's interesting, as publishers really know the different businesses in their community, they're able to work with those businesses in a way where they are better able to understand their value to the community and how to present that online.
That's amazing. I did that a lot as the publisher at the Sentinel. You know, after a few years, I'd worked with so many businesses, you know, and seen the experiments in how they displayed their products, what messages they put out there, what messages and images people respond to in this place, that I wound up, you know, really being more of a consultant than anything else.
Exactly.
You know, I had to take apart their services and figure out what would appeal most. You know, they would just hand me a business card and say, I put my name in there and make sure the address is right. And, you know, in some of the bigger ads where we had the time to really work the whole thing through.
And to be careful with that too, because if you find that you're consulting, put a fee, associate a fee with that. It's an incredible, valuable skill that you're contributing to that business. And if you set those expectations up front, that then they are knowing that that's time out of your day. So, you know, to be thinking about that very proactively, or if you know that you have a particular area of expertise or where you're seeing a lot of success, you're gaining a lot of traction, you're creating a lot of business for a given business or a sector of business, you know, be smart about, you know, how much time can you allocate toward that, what are the kinds of fees that you feel are reasonable in terms of what the market will bear, but be careful about giving away your time for free. There's a valuation of services to that for sure.
It's about the courage of the ask.
Well, yeah, and social media, for instance. A lot of you guys are doing a lot in social media. A lot of businesses have no idea. You can really help them with those types of things.
How much are you paying the bike chicks for talking today?
All the speakers are getting a per diem. It depends on how much food you guys eat.
And a sandwich.
No, per diem.
Would you maybe suggesting ways to find out what you should charge?
I will get back with you on that. I'm going to take some questions, and what we'll do is kind of come back to Cornelius with some of the things, because there's a number of ways that you might do that, depending on what the area is that you want to speak to, what the community is, those kinds of things. There's a lot of variables that would help you set those rates. And it probably would be a scale depending on who it is. But you want to be consistent. So if it's businesses, it's X. If it's a nonprofit, it's X. If it's a school, it might be something different. And then continuing down through directories. Out on the East Coast, I went out to a street fight conference, and some of you may be pretty familiar with street fight. It's not really about boxing. It's about the business of hyperlocal. And they've just recently launched out on the East Coast. They're coming out to the West Coast, actually, in San Francisco in June. But it's amazing how much more they are about the monetization of content on the East Coast than we see on the West Coast. And the idea of deals out there is huge. At the event in late October of 2011, the directories piece at their conference was huge. And real estate on the East Coast and publishers seizing that opportunity has been much more significant than what we're seeing out here on the West Coast. But it is a really interesting new type of a content model. BaristaNet is a local publisher covering a lot of local neighborhoods, but has really begun to build an amazing business where we're talking triple digits. Deb Gallant is making a profit, and she's making a good profit. She's making a good living. Mind you, she was spouse-sponsored for a number of years to enable her to be able to do this, and she also once wrote for the New York Times, a little publication that most people have heard of. But she's doing a great job as a reporter, having turned businesswoman, because she's looking at these kinds of opportunities that are there, and she's got a really good relationship with a lot of the different feet on the street relative to real estate.
So what is this? What is
This is a component that is all about real estate, and the real estate market out, of course, you know, across the country is always looking for ways of putting their content in front of local communities, and often it's just very much separated out from community content. Deb's already in the community. She's already across the neighborhood. She has a component of the site that is dedicated to real estate. So again, it's a revenue track. It's a separate revenue track from the actual publishing that she does, serving communities, and it is looking at the business of, you know, classifieds. Craigslist kind of stole the golden egg, but there are ways that local publishers can get back into that game, depending on, again, what makes sense based on your content model.
So this is about clawing back some of that
Yes.
from Craigslist.
Yeah, and bringing it back and giving it more flavor.
Right.
You know, giving it more dimension, giving it more of a journalistic approach to a story rather than just raw listings on a Craigslist site.
And that's, again, that goes back to sponsored content too, which is almost like the new classified model. And Ken will actually be able to tell a little bit about that maybe.
And if we continue to click through, so we can get to Ken. Collaborations, I've featured one here, and this is collaborations looking at community as a collaborator. Front Porch Forum is very similar to what Ken has going, and these guys are based in Vermont. Michael Wood Lewis is one of the nicest guys you could ever hope to meet, and a number of years ago, he and his wife decided that their neighborhood needed a place where they could go and figure things out that they, you know, were trying to address within their given neighborhood. But the only people that could participate were people in the neighborhood. So if you actually go to Front Porch Forum, you can't get into the site unless you live in one of the neighborhoods within one of the zip codes. But they now have half of Burlington, Vermont on the site. And all of the different neighborhoods are now being represented through the Front Porch Forum because everybody wanted a forum for their neighborhood. It's become a really, really neat model for them. They do advertising, but it is very much a community-to-community collaboration, and that they really get out and they problem solve within their communities about all kinds of things, as well as help neighbors find folks to help them move. So it's been a really neat model, again, very similar to Neighborhood Notes, but really taking community as a collaboration partner and taking it probably to heart as much as any other site that you're going to see out there. A really interesting model.
So this is kind of like a sophisticated bulletin board.
Yeah.
Somewhere between Facebook and a blog.
A little bit, I'd say, along those lines.
More
Less
geographic.
Facebooky and more bloggy.
Right.
Yeah.
But the idea is to connect with other people in your real
Yes,
area.
and in doing that as well, the advertising becomes much more meaningful too because it's extremely targeted. And the communities see this, the Michael Wood Lewis and his wife as being very much trusted, neutral arbiters about what kinds of things are going to be good for their communities.
So again, this is like possible when you have moved from audience to community. It's because there's enough commonality between your readers that now they just want to talk to each other. They don't need to just talk back and forth to you, you know. And so you create a space on your site where this conversation can happen because you've helped to create a unique space where people with the same shared values or geography
Or
can
problems
come,
or
yeah.
whatnot. Partnerships is a neat one. The partnerships is going to take us to a radio station that is nested in a legacy news site. And it's an interesting model that's just beginning to emerge more and more across the country, where you see radio embedded in a legacy print news site, or there's other models where you have a investigative news operation that's nested within a broadcast television station, and then that way broadcast is able to get more granular, to have more detail, to have more substance in their actual broadcast news, because they have someone that's actually having the opportunity to leverage that capacity of the broadcast station to be able to do the print or the digital news that they're producing. So it's interesting as you think about partnerships. One is to be very clear about what the partnership is and how it's mutually beneficial, but also how there is symbiotic news and reporting that you can do if you look at other people that have additional capacity or capacity that might be useful to someone else, and looking at that cross-platform mix is something that might be interesting to explore. And
in the room we have the ONN partnership with Neighborhood Notes, where there is Neighborhood Notes has always done a business roundup at the end of the month, and what we've done is that every week they contribute to a print business column in the Sunday business section on opening and closing businesses in the neighborhood, and they get paid a freelance fee for that, and it doesn't go online. At the end of the month they publish online, as they always do, the same content, and then we link back to it through ONN. And so for the Oregonian, it's good because we can have a contractual freelance relationship which is much easier for us to manage than, you know, revenue sharing and things like that, which is very technical and kind of, I'm dubious about them. But you know, there's a straight sort of payment for content, and it's you know, the paper can budget its revenue very cleanly in the paper, and it works because it's content that Neighborhood Notes is going to do anyway.
Yeah, no, that one has worked very well for that very reason. We have already been generating it, and actually doing it weekly has made it more efficient for us because we have a weekly deadline. So when it comes to at the end of the month to publish it on the first Tuesday, we just kind of assemble it, put an intro paragraph, and off it goes. So it really is actually, that's another benefit aside from getting paid for it. We're more efficient. Right.
So as we continue to click through, as we get to sponsorship and underwriting, it goes back to Cornelius's question earlier. The idea of sponsorship often can be, it might be like, go back to, if you would, if you click on to sponsorship. Thank you so much. Economy is a really neat model. It's in a number of different states. These guys are all about high quality content. They're looking at technology and business. Their philosophy is less is more, but they would rather see better quality than quantity. But they've done some very interesting things around the sponsorship model, which is sometimes, sponsorship can be a little bit looser because it's enabling you to publish either a particular program, it might be a particular initiative. Underwriting typically or often can be a particular series or a particular story. So as I would think about the difference of the two, sponsorship tends to be a little bit broader, but it's typically to bring about a particular either a mission related or topical related piece that may give the publisher a little bit more freedom into how those monies are going to be applied, whereas underwriting might be a bit more specific that it's a given series or a given story.
This is almost like the special section in a newspaper traditionally has been, is that, you know, we can drill down to a very precise topic, do an insert where we talk about, you know, Southeast Portland or just, you know, pizza, and this will allow us to also talk to a very specific community of advertisers, and so this is the same technique.
And exactly. So sorry, questions?
I just really wanted to quickly say, I mean, when you're talking about the partnership piece and what you guys are doing, and what you had said about the how it's actually helped your efficiency, it's so important to make sure that whatever your partnership you have isn't going to cause you more work. So we've been approached at my newspaper by these fancy people in New York, and they want to put this chat window on our website where the more people go on there, then those people get coupons, right? And the editorial staff's like, wait a minute, everybody stop. And then what do we have to do? Well, you might have to spur the conversation. What? The advertising staff loves it, think it's great, and we're bickering over it because we don't want it to cause us more work, and I think it's done. Okay? So keep that in mind. I think that the efficiency piece is absolutely really crucial.
Right, and again, it goes back to the expectations and to, you know, talk money early and often. You know, if there's some kind of a return for you, be really clear about what that is. As well as what are the time commitments that you may be getting into that you really haven't anticipated or that haven't been clearly articulated.
Yeah, Michael Anderson at Portland Afoot, I showed him earlier, was great in an earlier conversation with the partners in the news section about, you know, partnership this, partnership that, and Mike was just like, if you mind me quoting him, he was just like, as long as I don't have to do any work, it's fine.
Because we're all on a hamster wheel.
Yeah, totally.
Absolutely.
It's not like lazy, you know?
No. I mean, yeah, it's
well, and it also is what then is that time being taken away from that you need to be doing something else.
Yeah.
And is there enough value where that actually makes sense to you? And only do something really when you're ready to do it. I mean, it's good to take some chances, but to be very specific about what's going to be the return, what are we going to learn. At the Journalism Accelerator, we're constantly talking about mulch, and that's not just because we're from Portland. You know, compost and mulch is all the rage here. But it really is, how do you constantly take what you're learning and make that a part of building your business? Coming back to the slides, talking about syndication or lines of business, when you're thinking about lines of business, again, it's complementary. So what might be other additional areas where you're already doing the work, but there might be actual revenue streams that you could be attaching to that, and to be thinking about that very strategically with, you know, if you're blessed to have an editorial team, most publishers are 1 or 2 people. So it's really just thinking very strategically about those types of things and looking before you leap. Local media, now we're kind of moving into the, did we do the methods? I think we skipped one, or are we? Nope, we're good. Okay, I'm sorry. Go ahead. So local media, we're now getting into thinking about advertising or advertising platforms. And local media would be very quick to say we are not an ad platform, we're a marketplace. They are a new type of an approach to publishers having the ability to generate revenue from their content through the marketplace that they've really created specifically for publishers. Dick O'Hare and Elizabeth Harrington are two of the founders of local media. They launched last year. They started very humbly. They've already got 300 publishers within their network. Nobody has left the network that has come into it. There is a certain litmus test of being at about 50,000 page views before it begins to be profitable for the different publishers that they work with. But they really are on the side of publishers. And so we often look to them as being an authority or a source or an expert that's really, really, I think, fundamentally helpful and practical to our community, because we're really looking at how can publishing thrive. And who are the entities out there that are really looking at helping journalism and publishing generally be stronger?
And this is an ad network, I mean, in the simplest terms.
Yeah, it's a marketplace, and they have a very different or a very much more. In what we've seen that's emerging across the country, we see these guys having a model that is definitely publisher first. And in talking to Elizabeth earlier this week and letting her know that I was going to come and be talking with you all, she was very quick to give me some differentiators about like what they do and why it's unique. But as they were being advised by advisors, they were told very clearly they would have to decide the line between either advertising or publisher. And they chose the side of publisher, and everything that they do is really oriented around that. So I asked them, so from their expert purview, what are some of the things that publishers should be thinking about before they get into an ad network? Again, looking before you leap. What are the kinds of things that are important to know? They gave me a great handout, and if you want to contact me, I can give you that in its entirety. If we go back to the slides, I'm going to highlight a few of those. Okay. If you could actually move along here on my... Thank you so much. Here's our... And there's more than this, but as you look into what might be good for your content or how you might be looking at in an ad network, there's a lot of tried and failed methods out there, and there are a lot that are still continuing to emerge in the marketplace. There's hundreds of them. But really looking at what are the contract requirements. Google AdSense and local media, it's really just terms, conditions and terms like you would be signing, a waiver on Google. It's not exclusivity and things like that. But the knowing about the requirements around exclusivity are really important, because it makes a huge difference in terms of being able to market your content or to be able to syndicate your content in other ways. Knowing what the payment model, what the structure is. And being really savvy about what is the ad creative. I mean, all of us hate the pop-up ads or things that are obstructing content. So really knowing if you are going to have somebody that is going to be advertising, how is that going to affect the experience of your site? What is their payment policy? How often will you see payment? And what are the expectations around that? How are you able to track your site results? Are things being counted in a way that makes sense to you in terms of impressions and whatnot? If you do have questions, is there somebody that you contact, or do you have to deal with an FAQ, or you're just never going to get through to a human being? There's another number of additional ideas, and also just sort of a glossary that they offer. And again, let me know if you'd like to see that. I'd be happy to share it with you. And then coming back to just generally resources for the Journalism Accelerator, some of the ways that we came to approach this project out of the gate was really thinking of it from sort of a perspective of Craigslist. What would be really useful to publishers, and how might we help better surface a lot of the different things that are happening? And what we see is resources being incredibly useful, and from a practical perspective, not from a philosophical one, or somebody's just trying something and bringing it new to market. What is fundamentally really useful to these communities? And in conversation in these forums, really seeing how the publishers are able to discuss with each other what they see working, or to challenge one another and say, well, that sucked for us. Why is it working for you? Because what works in one market might not work in another market.
When you were talking about local media, you said they only started to deal with people after 50,000. And I'm like, 50,000 per year, 50,000
page views
week?
per month, and it's not deal with, it's when does it become profitable, or when does it become worthwhile to the publisher. Again, it goes back to the point of if it's worth your time, because you only have this much time in a day.
You'll cry and you'll miss cocktail hour.
I mean, all of that, and you just don't want to miss cocktail hour. So it's really good to have a sense of at what point does that become something that's going to be worthwhile to me, or might I be exploring other things that might be more beneficial, depending on where you are as you're building your audience.
So we do need to wrap up so that we can.
And so we're at the end now, basically. So this is just, again, going through this index that we've recently produced. We'd really strongly recommend and welcome you guys to come to the Journalism Accelerator. Check out this index. It's all about sustainability. Feel free to offer your ideas or your suggestions if you see things that aren't there that you think are smart, that other publishers would value. You can go ahead and just keep clicking through at this point. So we really broke it out from how-tos, emerging best or better practices, as well as memorable quotes. And Emily Harris, who's our editorial director, really thought about it from the perspective of what would I want to print out and put in front of my desk that I could look at just to kind of keep me on track or to inspire me. And then we have a new forum that's going to be coming up this week, and it's going to be extending for the next couple weeks, and it just happens to be on collaboration as it's related to revenue. There's a lot of collaboration that's starting to happen across the country. Doesn't always mean revenue. So we're going to be talking with different publishers around how they see those two things syncing up. And in this particular forum, we're bringing together Collaboration Central, which is a project of Media Shift, and the Center at Berkeley, the investigative journalism school there, where they have brought a bunch of folks out last week. We're going to be extending the conversation from that conference, specifically about increasing revenue through collaboration, because at the end of the day, that was the big question they wanted to ask. And we would welcome any or all of you to come and join us in that conversation, if it's just to watch and to lurk, or if it's to contribute, or if it's to ask us questions. But that's pretty much what I have for you today.
Awesome.
And we welcome you to participate in the great experiment.
I just want to throw two more things on the table. So I think our guidelines at the scanner are the more our tools change, the more what we do stays the same, right? And that's really important for hyper-local people, which we are not hyper-local at the scanner. But one of the traditional things that community newspapers have always done is have advertising, what's the word I'm looking for? Directories, ad directories, right? You can do them, you can build them right on Google Map, right? But the thing that we're looking at now is that people are monetizing their advertising, and they're starting to move upward with their advertising by creating advertising directories that are digitally based using QR codes. If you're not paying attention to what your businesses are doing with QR codes, you're screwing up. Because there's more and more consultants that are helping small businesses like Milo's City Cafe, right? And do you know what a QR code is? Probably some people do, some people don't. They're these little things that look like robot barf. And I'm looking around, the Oregonian has them. You use your smartphone, you wave it over that, and you see the ad. Well, you may not realize it, but in the advertising world, a lot of these small businesses are skipping news media and just going straight with the QR codes to their customers on Twitter. But if you can insert yourself in that conversation, say for example with a neighborhood business directory, people love that, and you can track it. They can the advertisers can see exactly how many times people have looked at their ad and used those. You really need to put that on your radar. And the other thing is, when you're talking about monetizing your content, especially Diane and the bug ladies, you know, so I am part of a literary community. The literary community doesn't pay any attention to the news community, but they sit there and bitch about ebooks, don't they, right? I'm saying that I think it could be a really smooth move for people with nonfiction content, bug people, health people. Consider rolling your extended content into an ebook, because I'm sure you're probably not paying attention to this, but it's the nonfiction ones that you've never heard of before. People are making $50,000, $100,000, an ebook about how to get the smell of cat pee out of fabric. I'm not joking. That lady's got money. She might not be rich. But if you're thinking about, I mean, I just want to encourage people to look at that. And if you're a dirty blogger, check out 50 Shades of Grey, what they did with the ebook. And there's probably nobody here that will admit to being a dirty blogger, but people probably should be thinking about that. Never mind, we can talk about it when the stream's off.
Okay. Offline
anyway, but start looking at these ebooks, because you can take content you've already done and imagine making an ebook for kids.
Yeah.
People will buy that, and you can read it on your smartphone. I just wanted to throw those two things out there.
I just wanted to wrap up with one final thing. The Journalism Accelerator is very much a capacity building organization, and it's unusual right now that we're seeing that really out in the field, because so much of the The funder effort is really around either technology or just very specific investigative other types of things. But we're really out to try to help the overall capacity of publishers and what's happening in the field. If you guys have cool things that you're doing or things that you want other people to be aware of, Nicole Staudinger is here today. Nicole, wait, raise your hand. She works on the social part of our program. We have about 1,600 followers. We have a really, really rich community in our Twitter follower community across publishers. So let us know if you're doing neat things or interesting things, or you want to bounce stuff off of us. And you can come at us through Twitter, which is JernExcel, @JernExcel, or reach out to me directly. But we're really here to showcase some of the really neat things that are happening. So please feel free to reach out to us and connect with us.